How many of you feel you're good storytellers? Okay, some hands shot up. Great. Now, others of us feel that we tell a story, and at the end, people are like, well, what happened here? Or there are loose ends, right? It can be quite tough to tell a story, especially under pressure. But stories are incredibly important. Obviously, you've got to tell a data story, but the so-called father of public speaking, Aristotle, said that we need three things to be effective speakers. We need, first of all, ethos, which is our credibility as a speaker. You're all credible. You're all in a job where you're dealing with data. You've been hired for a reason. There's your logos, which is your logic, how you put your arguments together. But finally, there's pathos, which is emotion. Are you appealing to people's hearts in some way? Or maybe if it's there, it might be the bottom line in terms of work, right? But is there some story that will awaken the human being in us? So that's why storytelling is so important. Now, when I shared my story with you today, I used a particular framework which is called the now, then, how framework. And it's sometimes called the DIP. There's a speaker in the States called Lisa Nichols who calls it the DIP. And this is a fantastic little framework for storytelling because it really keeps us to the point. So we start with where we are now, what's going well. And then we transition to, but it wasn't always like that. Or, but if you'd seen us 6 months ago, or if you'd seen us a year ago. Then you share what the problems were, the challenges. And then finally, you share how you turned that around, how you came out of those challenges. Now, there are two payoffs in this framework. The first is the payoff of people kind of liking to hear bad news, right? So if you start with, oh, everything's great, people are like, oh, this is boring. Everything's great, but it wasn't always that way. There's a lean-in moment, isn't there? Like, oh, really? It wasn't? So that's the first payoff for the audience. The second payoff is the how, because you're sharing your top tips for how you turned around a difficult situation. And this framework can be modified to talk about bad news. It can also be modified for you to be making recommendations in the workplace. But for now, we'll use it in this format. So the next exercise, again, you've got 60 seconds for this, is B's this time. I want you to use this DIP framework to share a time when you overcame an obstacle or a challenge. And before you go for this, I want you to listen out for the following things. Did they start with current success? Because people often get confused and they start in the past. But this framework is not as effective if you don't start with current success, okay? Because it's that gap between the success and the challenges of the past that creates the intrigue and the interest in this framework. So A's listen out. Did they start with success? And then listen out for, did they share how they got out of that challenge? Make sense? Yeah. So B's, off you go. You have 60 seconds, so very brief. B's, how was that framework for you? Put your hands up if you enjoyed using it. Yeah, so most of you, fantastic. So this is another one that you can use, whether you're down the pub telling a story about what happened to you last weekend, or whether you're in a work situation, because it's great for talking about overcoming client challenges. And it's also really good for job interviews where you're talking about your competencies.